2 years ago, photographs showing hundreds of migrant children crammed into tiny cells leaked onto the internet. For many Americans, it was their first glimpse of the treatment of families held in privately operated for-profit detention centers in our own backyards. Reports have described these facilities as freezing cold, unsanitary, overcrowded, and completely lacking in privacy. These families are fleeing South American countries where they face inhumane conditions at the hands of corrupt governments and organized crimes, and oftentimes economic hardships, much of which had been fueled by U.S. trade deals like NAFTA. In a report published last year by the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, women described leaving their homes after their children were forced to choose between joining gangs or being killed. Others reported that they faced death if they could not pay massive extortion fees. Department of Homeland Security officials told the New York Times last year that 2,600 women and children were being held in one center in Pennsylvania and 2 centers in Texas after fleeing state violence in their home country. In July, a federal judge ordered the release of those immigrant children in facilities, and in January, Pennsylvania officials announced that the permit for the state's only detention center would be revoked. And in September, hoping to circumvent the federal court's ruling and keep the centers open, Texas announced new emergency regulations that allow the Department of Family and Protective Services to certify family detention centers as child care facilities. But the truth is, child care regulations being waived include limits on maximum occupancy and rules on sharing bedrooms with unrelated adults, risking the children's safety and well-being. Grassroots Leadership, an Austin-based nonprofit that opposes for-profit prisons, sued Texas over these regulations, arguing there was no emergency allowing the state to waive basic human rights. The nonprofit won a temporary injunction in November, and this forced the state to accept public input in the changes. An open records request showed that the state received over 5,000 pages of overwhelmingly negative testimonies against the proposed rules. But the state pressed on anyways, and the rules went into effect February 12th. Now, in response, immigration reform activists opened up a pop-up daycare outside Governor Abbott's office. And today I'm joined by Alejandro Caceres, immigration organizer at Grassroots Leadership. And I began by asking him to tell me more about the reaction his organization received from the state after challenging the rules. Take a look.
We were talking about what kind of action we could have that would highlight the absurdity of the state of Texas deciding to give a detention center a childcare facility license. So we were kind of brainstorming and just talking about it. And we're like, well, if that can become a childcare facility, right? Like, what else can? And we thought that it would be great to then just turn Governor Abbott's office into a childcare facility. Say, hey, if y'all have the ability to make ridiculous decisions, then we will also have the ability to make ridiculous decisions by turning everything that we see into a childcare facility. And telling people that we're definitely not trained to be childcare providers, but neither are the guards inside of the detention center. So during the action, some of us went out and handed out flyers telling people that there was a childcare facility upstairs, and then telling them that we weren't trained, and then explaining to them why we were doing this and why it was important for us to like pass this information around. And I think that one of the biggest accomplishments of that was we actually convinced a group of people that there was a childcare facility, and they started looking for it, and they started asking they went in and asked the guards. And I think that was really interesting, that the type of reaction was like, oh yeah, I mean, it's weird that there's a childcare facility here, and like, it's weird that like, you're not trained, but it's also really interesting that they like went in and asked the guards about the childcare facility in the second floor.
Where are these undocumented immigrant families coming from, and how many are actually being held in these facilities? I mean, is there really a number that we know about?
So most of them are coming from Central America, right? From Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And most of them are fleeing state-sanctioned violence. And I think that there's thousands of folks held in detention centers, right? And I think that it's also so many of them are coming in, and so many of them are being detained and released so quickly because of the Judge G's ruling in California that you couldn't detain them for a really long time. So folks are being held about 1 week to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think at the most is a month. And if they get held for longer, they get sent to the Berks Detention Center in Pennsylvania that just recently got their license taken away. So yeah, there's thousands of folks that are being detained, and all of them are coming from Central America.
That's obviously horrific enough. I mean, can you describe the conditions these families are facing inside these for-profit migrant prisons?
We heard that some of the children were put in solitary confinement or solitary confinement-like conditions for asking for extra milk. All of the families have told us they can't take their snacks back to their room, and if their kids get hungry, well, that's too bad. They should have eaten during eating hours. Recently, we just heard that one of the bilingual teachers got fired, and they were replaced with an all English-speaking guard who has no training in teaching, who also has no Spanish ability whatsoever. When important people, as they say, go and visit, they get really, really good food. The food obviously goes back to being really, really terrible when those people leave. The kids get toys and blankets and all these things that they can play with while the people are visiting. But as soon as those people leave and as soon as those doors close, they take up everything and they search every single child in every single room to make sure that they didn't take any of the toys, and they lock them up in a closet somewhere. And those kids, the families never actually get to see those things again until someone important comes back to visit the detention center. The conditions the kids are facing, the conditions that the moms are facing, is there isn't proper health care, there isn't food, there isn't anywhere that the kids can go to play around. They have a very strict schedule where they have to go to school and they have to listen to the guards, and if not, they get taken away from their parents.
And what can activists for immigrants' rights do now that the state has changed its regulations to keep these children locked up? I mean, what can they do?
For me, right, I think it's a very interesting question because the next part of the child care licensing is that they're going to have a hearing in their separate counties, right? So Dilley Detention Center is going to have a hearing in Frio County, and Karnes Detention Center is going to have a hearing in Karnes County. And their arguments are no longer based on whether this is good for families or whether this is good for kids or mothers, but it's actually how it's going to benefit the county. And of course, I'm assuming that they're going to be talking about money and resources. That process has to be disrupted. We've lost the argument on the fact that these detention centers shouldn't be licensed because it's going to have terrible effects on children and the mothers that are coming to the United States. So for me, I think that organizers and activists have to step up on what is willing to happen, what they're willing to do. I think that this is a dire situation that deserves some really critical actions, and I think that the old ways of doing things, the ways that we had thought would work, right, whether that was talking to our council or talking to our state representatives, talking to our U.S. representatives, is no longer working. I think what it needs to happen is the disruption of the system, right? I think that there actually legitimately needs to be a civil disobedience for the first time around family detention in a long time, because the families is really dependent on it. I think it's really important for us to step up and use all the privileges we have on the outside to make sure that the families know that we support them, and that the counties and the state knows that this isn't acceptable anymore.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that these families and children will find the basic human rights that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you.